Përshëndetje, a mundem ju lut me ullë në për iksat që janë vendosë në për ullëse, janë gjithat vendosën në distancë. Mirë se erdhët në ditën e dytë të Hope Media Carnival. Unë nuk po zgjas shumë, veç po dum ju tregu që për përkthem pajisjet janë këtu, for translation, the equipment is here. Again, prap merrni një ka një që mos krijohet radhë. Ata që janë të na pa online, përkthimi është vetëm shkruani në grupin e Facebook-un Kosovë 2.0 dhe në faqen e Facebook-ut edhe dikush ka me ju ndihmu se qysh mundeni me pas qasje në përkthim. Për ndryshe, po më duket që nuk na kanë mbet ma shumë detaje, veç që po ja fillojmë, mbajeni distancën, mbajeni maska, nëse doni me pi diçka ose me hongër diçka, ka atje që atje në qosh, veç shkoni një ka një. Pra, okay? I'll leave the floor to Ilir.
Thank you, Olyon. My name is Ilir Gashi. I know it's usually pronounced Ilir, but that's a different story that I will not get into right now. I'm very happy to be here with you today, also in this beautiful venue. It kind of reminds me of the Greek forum, so I guess we will have at least half a quality of discussion as they would used to have. As you all know, the topic of today's talk is the left, and there is probably not a better time, or there hasn't been a better time to talk about the left than this day and this time you're living in. It's quite apparent that the world is in a crisis, and as much as we can see the crisis as something that can pull us down, we can also look at it as a chance and as an opportunity to maybe stir up the world, the societies we live in, and come out and emerge in a different society. And we don't know what's going to happen with the COVID pandemic, with the economic crisis. We know that with these, what came about was the feeling that the current system we are living in, or the system much of the world is living in, or most of the world, did not respond to the actual needs of the people the system said they represented. And in a very physical sense, this response was deadly for many. And if there was ever time to discuss social justice and social equality, it could be today. But then on the other hand, we could also think about the negative factors that come along with this situation. In times of danger, people experience fear. In times of fear, people need security. And when they need security, there is always, a proper, strong-handed populist to provide solutions. And in many ways, the world is more divided than ever. And in many different ways, we might be further away from the ambition of the left than we have ever been. So the questions for today, and maybe we'll get to other questions, and maybe we'll not even discuss those, but I think they're important. Are we just, dreaming our dream, thinking about the left, or are we just ignoring the reality? Are we just rejecting that the capitalism has won and it's here to stay? Or there is a reason for hope? And if there is a reason for hope, is there a vision of this other world? And if there is a vision, if there is a plan? And I would be very happy to find some answers to these questions, because I myself, as someone put it yesterday in the first talk on the festival, we should embrace hopelessness as a concept, and we should try to work in it. And I'm happy to say that I have already done that. So I'm personally hoping that I will get some reasons to hope more. Now, on the side of the speakers, we have a very eclectic and interesting mix. On the left, we have Arlind Čuri from Tirana, organizata politike, University of Tirana pedagogist, and why I especially enjoy the ability to talk to him is the many times demonstrated ability to mobilize people, which has been for many years one of the main weaknesses of the left, to leave the bubble and to go out and to talk to people, to motivate them to understand their strives and their struggles, and to make them part of the community. Nita Ljutsi, anthropologist and professor at the University of Pristina, anthropologist sociology department. Then on the Zoom, we have Dobrica Vestalinovic from Belgrade. He is an activist, political innovator, and grassroots organizer. I can personally testify to most of that being true. And he's also one of the leaders of famous, in Serbia, a very famous movement called Do Not Drown Belgrade, which started off as a local movement fighting this huge investors project, but in years it has grown to become one of the strongest opposition parties, opposition groups with some novelty in their approach. And as a very special guest, he is that special that we didn't even announce him because he came in very late, is Sibor Jančić, one of the founders of Zagrad political party, Zagreb, Croatia. The main reason why we have Sibor today is also a reason why I want to congratulate him. A platform called Možemo, which is a group of left organizations in Croatia, they took part in the elections, national elections in Croatia last weekend, and they've achieved an astonishing, I should say, historical success by winning 7 seats in the parliament. So welcome, Sibor, and I hope you'll be able to share with us how did that happen. But before we get into what's happening on the left, locally and regionally, I would like to give floor to Dobrica, who is in Belgrade now. I guess that many of you have heard what's happening in Belgrade right now. You might have seen the videos. Dobrica has been out in the streets for 2 nights now. And I've got 2 questions for him. One is, what is the atmosphere? What is the vibe he is getting? What are you experiencing on the streets? And then the second question is, why are people in the streets and why are there so many of them?
Okay, hi all. First, thank you for the invitation, and I'm very sorry that I cannot join you personally in Pristina. But the situation is both by epidemic and because of the riots in Belgrade are totally eclectic, and I cannot make it to travel. But I hope some other day it will, that will happen. So what we hear now is the sound of a helicopter, which is running around the center of Belgrade. And during yesterday evening, especially, it was riots and plenty of usage of police, tear gas, horses, dogs, and all of the equipment that police is equipped by to disperse the protests that emerged 2 days ago. Atmosphere is very difficult to explain. There are plenty of people who are expressing their discontent with the current government. There are right-wing groups, and there are plenty of different state security services. There are undercover police. There are nobody knows basically what is happening. Because the main idea from the government and from the secret police is to discredit the protest and to make it as violent as it is possible. So that is kind of briefly answer to first question, but I guess the second question is more important because the roots of the protest is by the general sentiment and feeling in people that they are betrayed by the government and by the state, because the sentiment is that the government does not respond properly on the crisis, and that is especially fueled up with the reports from independent journalists who then discovered that they were cover up by about the numbers of people who are infected. And there is also reports that were emerged a couple of days ago about the bad situation in some hospitals and in some parts of Serbia where there are plenty of cases, new cases, and the health system which is going under the heavy pressure, pressure, and there is, yeah, we can go into detail later, but there will, yeah, big pressure around that issue. So yeah.
We've had national elections in Serbia 21st of June, and one of the things that happened was that after 2 months of implementing the harshest measures in all of Europe, the government of Serbia, beginning of May, they've declared victory, basically. And many of us believe that the reason why they did this was to allow for elections to happen. And the day after the elections, the number of people infected and the number of people died jumped dramatically. So I want to ask Dobrica again, you decided, just as some other opposition or most of the opposition parties in Serbia, you decided to boycott these elections. And also, given that one of the topics for today's discussion is parliamentary fights versus the one happening outside parliament, can you tell us why have you opted for boycotting, and why would some people in your group, and I know you had discussions about this, would also opt for going out for elections?
Yeah, so this story is, we must go a little bit back into 1 year from now. But situation, how we see the current political situation in Serbia is basically something which is called, yeah, stabilocracy by definition, and the state capture from top of the government, especially with the President Aleksandar Vučić, which has all of the political power in his hand. And we saw that there were no real circumstances for the elections. It was, we are facing not just this year's, but like a whole decade, the very harsh media blockade. Also, we are seeing this very heavy pillar of state controlled and orchestrated attacks to independent journalists, activists, political oppositions. We also see facing this kind of very strong court pillar of how they're like judicially attacking the every oppositional and every other thinking. And also what we are seeing that the system of elections is totally under control of ruling party. We were participating in the previous local elections in 2018, and what we faced and witnessed in this process is that whole of the game was totally rigged, in the sense that there is plenty of pressures on the voters, there is no equal representation in media, and there is no even close fair elections. So because of that, after one process of civic protest and also foreign mediation from the European Union, that after those mediation, that we come closer to fairer electoral process. We didn't see any results in that. Everything stays the same, and we then decided to boycott elections because we are seeing that basically the system and the state is boycotting us. That every our proposition or petition or initiative was declined, and then we start into thinking about how we can organize outside of the institutions and outside of this parliamentary fight, which is at this point not giving any results and basically not working.
And when you say that the conditions for fair elections do not exist, it resonates strongly. It coincides with what I read that was the case in Albania a year ago, when the opposition also decided to boycott the elections. And also I have read more than once that Albania is also being described as a captured state. So Arjen, can you please tell us a little bit about this? Is this how things are? And if yes, is there at all a possibility for institutionalized political action? And again, if not, what is there to be done and how?
Albania is a captured state. It's not even a democracy. It's not even a liberal democracy, in my opinion. And my opinion about liberal democracy is not very high, theoretically. But anyhow, Albania doesn't even meet the basic requirements of liberal democracy. We have had pluralism, political pluralism, in the recent decades, but each party which is in government basically controls all the institutions. But in my opinion, the basic problem of Albania is not this kind of flawed formal democracy, but is the fact that the state, the government, each government, lacks even the minimal autonomy towards what was used to be called the ruling class, and now we are used to call the oligarchy. So basically, very rich people in Albania, people who got rich through a process of accumulation by dispossession. So basically stealing everything, privatizing everything for cheap amounts of money. They basically control the economy. They are not more than 10, 15, 20 people. They do control the economy, they do control our resources, economic resources, natural resources, and they basically control the government. It would not be that bad if they only control the government. Because common people might hope that, okay, but maybe we can change the government, maybe we can vote for oppositional parties, so there might be some hope. But unfortunately in Albania, these oligarchs, these very rich people, do control even the oppositional parties, the main oppositional parties. They used to be their previous partners, where the opposition party were in government some 7 years ago. They do control now the ruling party. On the other hand, we live in an ideological condition where common people are told that individually they have hope. They can become everything. If they try hard, they are told, they can be very successful entrepreneurs. They can be, successful politicians. They can be successful artists, professionals, and things like that. But of course, the overwhelming majority of the people do not meet these kind of ideological requirements. So of course they fail. And they are then used to blame themselves for that failure. So basically people are imbued with the illusion of individual hope, and what they arrive at is just this kind of alienation and even depression. On the other hand, the current and ruling ideology tells people that collectively there's no hope. Collectively, you may, of course, you may form a criminal gang, but you cannot form a movement. Because collectively, even if you are successful, you're going to end up in some kind of totalitarian party and things like that. And in my opinion, if there is hope, is to work and fight together with common people, workers, students, middle class people, and construct day by day a new kind of hope. The hope that comes from collective engagement. There is a good German Marxist philosopher named Ernst Bloch who wrote a book whose title is The Hope Principle. And he was talking about hope as an objective attitude, as an attitude which comes after you understand the current objective conditions, after you understand the strength, the empowerment that comes from collective organizations, and which leads to, he calls it, daydreaming. Daydreaming is emancipatory. It's not like a dream in the night, because it can communicate to others. It can build a new cognitive map, and it can even construct something which sounds an oxymoron, but he tells us, he calls this a real utopia. What is a real utopia? It's not something that is impossible. It's only something that looks impossible from the current ideological and alienated socio-economical conditions. The real utopia, as Bloch tells us, is the realm of not yet, whose seeds are in the present, and which we can actualize by, of course, not just by studying and reading books. Of course, these things are important, but also by organizing and by moving things. Once we move things, we can really understand what is possible, what looks utopian is possible. I don't know if I answered your question.
You've answered many more. But there is one thing I want to ask now. So obviously, I mean, you're saying that democracy in Albania is a sort of a theater stage on which private interests pose as public, and the audience believes in these because they were all distributed to a piece of paper with a very convincing narrative that if they only fight individually, personally, they will succeed, they can be part of the system. Whereas through collective action, we can achieve actual change. But then I'm thinking about Veto Vendosje. I'm an outsider, so I'm not going to say I know enough, or at least as much as any one of you does. It seems to me from the outside that it gave a good example of collective organization, and at some point it resulted in the political outcome, meaning that Albin Kurti became the prime minister of the country. But then, as we well know, something changed, and this change appears to have come from the outside. And here I want to remember this sentence from the famous Milian Dialogue, which was a manuscript written 2,000 years ago, probably, way before the invention of capitalism, and it says, the strong do what they have the power to do, and the weak accept what they must accept. So knowing all this, what you said, Arlind, I want to ask Nita, how can we operate politically in our community, thinking about ourselves as either individual or group political subjects, whereas we are being treated very effectively as political objects?
Okay, so that's a good one. So at the risk of sounding maybe too, because I think one thing that I wanted to maybe first draw on is that what I heard from Adlind, and which I think is incredibly relevant, is that there is a politics to emotions, that there are structures of feeling, if I could use that term, that become relevant in thinking about how that kind of mobilization happens. Because hope could be seen as something like that. So not necessarily as something that would disarm oneself or would make oneself vulnerable, but as something that could potentially be empowering. Now I have questions about that, and I'm not sure that I have made up my mind about it. But as sort of a feminist scholar and activist, I tend to find possibilities in the margins. And I think that there's a lot of potential in positions of marginality that are not positions of victimization, but that are positions of marginality that have been structurally produced. And so I would not necessarily pose the question as to, wanting to explain what happened in this case with what happened with Vendosje. I'll get to that. But I think that to entirely see this as something that is a society that is entirely determined by forces outside of itself, I think would be very inaccurate, because what Arlene explained for Albania is true for Kosovo, and is true for Serbia, and is true for Macedonia and Bosnia and so forth. That these are in no way these democracies, liberal democracies, and of course we have our questions about whether we do actually want liberal democracies, and that's where one of the disagreements is. And I think ultimately what happened with Vendosia is that, or what happened with what was actually a coup. What we had in Kosovo was a coup. We had an overthrow of a democratically elected government, which was orchestrated by political elites within the country and those from outside. And what happened was that a particular moment of hope, you might say, and I think this both for people who voted for Vendosia and those who did not vote for Vendosia, kind of felt that there was a new kind of feeling, political kind of possibility, whatever that. But there were also those that were incredibly frightened. And what they did, I think what happened was that fear was capitalized. And the fear that what will happen is that we will have somebody who will come in and dictate, and we'll have somebody that will come in and govern with some kind of iron fist, and somebody that is not democratic, and somebody that is not open, was an explanation that fed on people's fears. And this was explained also, I think, and this was also used in legitimizing the kinds of interventions we saw in that now that we have Vendosia as the main, sort of one of the partners in the coalition, we are going to lose the support of the United States. And so if we lose the support of the United States, oh my God, what will happen? We're all going to die. And because if the United States doesn't support us, then we're not going to get, I don't know, 30 million of funds from the MCC, which is really nothing if you think of what the MCC is supposed to do. It's supposed to invest in the energy sort of landscape, and you cannot do anything with 30 million in the energy landscape, which is when we were talking about earlier that the whole sort of theater in Serbia with Vučić and the plane coming in from China, I actually think of it as the smoke and mirrors behind actually energy deals. And that's kind of how I'm thinking about this. And so on the question of where to find hope, I actually find it in the different movements that recognize that there is a fight over resources that are the determining resources of the now and of the future. And this is water, and this is other kinds of energy. We still have the dream in Kosovo, or energy-producing kinds of resources. In Kosovo, we still have the dream of coal somehow still saving us, and maybe it will, while it also kills us softly, or not so softly, actually, as we saw for the past couple of years. But ultimately, I think that's where I find kind of empowerment, and we've seen it, for example, with the mobilization of communities in Štrpce. We had Serbian and Albanian residents come together to defend rivers, and you see it in other instances. You see communities coming together to defend water resources, at one point also land, but that was also actually about getting a good deal on privatization of land because of the power plant that was supposed to be built. But I think ultimately that's where we should be thinking, what we should be thinking about. It's the resources that will fuel the sort of the generation of tomorrow. Because one thing, just to quickly, one thing that a student of mine kind of said to me just this last term, which was to me like, oh yes, of course. He said, I hear this thing about the 2008 financial crisis, and I've just heard it 3 times recently. What was this about? And so to me, this was something that happened yesterday. And for them, it's something that happened ages ago. They don't in any way see how it has produced the current condition. But now there's the pandemic, and there's going to be this new major crisis. So I guess he was 6 years old in 2008, and maybe, in 13 years, my 5-year-olds, they will say, what was that whole pandemic about? But they will have another crisis, and probably much more frequent crises to deal with. Unless, and I think even now it's a little bit too late, but maybe instead of fixing things, we can try to at at least kind of mitigate a little bit. So I think the question about Vidvendosa and some question in the power grabs are important, but they're not the most important ones. And I don't think that we should be necessarily spending that much time thinking about how to throw these power leads or how to think about power leads and so forth, but it's actually to think about how they're in bed together, taking over the resources that are actually our public good. So we need to think of what constitutes this public good that we come together to protect, right? So I don't know. I know I didn't answer your question.
You did in part, but my question is, even if we recognize, even if everyone recognizes what you're saying, there'll be a fight over resources. There'll be an elite, be it a business elite or a criminal elite or a political elite, or all three together, as usually is the case, be it local elite or multinational or international elite. There is always an elite, and they come with the feature of liking the power and also doing everything they can to preserve their power. And it seems logical that we have to take that power away from them, which is when we arrive to the question of resources we have available to fight. So I was wondering, how do we...
What's happening in Belgrade the past couple of days is what should have happened in Kosovo when our assembly voted to bring in a new government to power, but it didn't happen. Because I think that's what needed to happen. I think we needed, what this society should have done is gone into the assembly and taken it over. That's how I see it. And we do have to take over politics in the way in which they're conducted. We have to change the very way in which politics are seen. If we do not do that, then obviously it is going to be about the reproduction of these elites, with a lot of reproductive care that goes unpaid as well, but yeah.
So to sum it up, we have Serbia with a state that is kidnapped from its citizens. We have most of the opposition parties boycotting the elections. We have the, I would say similar, but in many ways different still, case of Albania. And then we have Kosovo, in which people have elected, they have voted for a change, and then someone twisted an arm behind the door and the change did not happen. And then we go to Croatia.
They didn't twist it, they broke the arms and the legs, I think, but yeah.
I want to ask Sibor, how does this all look from his perspective? You decided to take part in the parliamentary fight. Apparently, I mean, it also means that you believe that you can achieve a change through institutions. So how does it all look from your perspective? Also, Croatia being the only country in the European Union, do you think that makes a difference or not? You need to turn on the microphone.
Okay, so it's really funny to talk about political fights because right now behind this wall is going a political fight. I'm currently in the city of Zagreb Assembly, and we are stayed here because the main place is devastated by earthquake. So, and to make one step back, while you were making an introductory speech, I remembered 2012 Green Academy on island of Vis, and we had a similar assembly there talking about similar topics, and I was working there and listening. I think there were some guests from Syriza who were telling us about the experience in Greece, and somebody from Podemos about Spain. So it is funny to see myself now in the other position to talking about our great experience in Croatia. Institutional fight is something that doesn't happen overnight. It's something I'm sure you all know is something you build up, and you're waiting for the right moment to come to take your part in it. First of all, the whole building of left ideology, a left party started more than 10 years ago in Croatia, and these results of these elections, which were happened a few days ago, is just cream of that work. So the speaker before me, she was telling about how we have to, by violence, maybe to take the part in the assembly, but that sometimes looks really appealing, but I don't believe that is the way, because that's just making one step back. Because if you put a violence act, then somebody else will put a violence back at you. So institutional way is the more democratic way, non-violence way, and this is I believe, the right way to do it. Although we have a feeling now that we made a big accomplishment, we have to be realistic and to say that that is not quite correctly, because after this election, the right parties gain a lot of power in the Croatian parliament. So the rights are on the power, not the lefts. Although the left, green left, entered the Croatian parliament. Our experience here is we're also always. I was going on a lot of conferences where we had a lot of philosophical talks about how to do things. But at the end, I'm sure, as Dobrica knows, you have to find small topics which general population can relate to them. Is it the water? Is it some social space? Is it some building they want to turn down? Is it some gender issue or something like that? And if you have a mass people relating to your problem, to the problem you're making agenda, then you have followers, and followers are the one who are the voters, and the voters are the one who are making the democracy process go, and they are giving you the democratic power.
I have a question. I have many friends in Croatia and also in Zagreb, and many of them were very supportive of Možemo, which is a coalition of platform gathering several different organizations and movements. And I must say, I was personally fascinated with how they supported, how they've shown support to Možemo, and also how they celebrated this result. And there was something very hopeful about in their reaction. They saw something new in your approach, and they trust you. And I want to ask you, where does this trust come from? Is it lack of trust in conventional political actors? Is it a new approach? Is it the topics you were?
Well, all the speakers before me, they said the right things, but we can say that Croatia came from a similar position as Kosovo now, because we had the same thing, warlords, and then we had war profiteers, and the story of 200 rich families and things like that. And things are now not so much different, but the atmosphere is much more peaceful and democratic, and things can be done. People recognize us because of the things we did. So we didn't stop pushing the subjects. We didn't change the subjects. We were recognized as fighters from the civil society who entered the local political arena and started to make a fight against our main local enemy, which is the Mayor Bandic behind me. And people recognize the fight. Before the election, we had two main things. This is the coronavirus, which came in this area, and we had earthquake. So people were looking for new persons who can give them hope to bring them out of this rotten government. As a parallel process to this is that we had two main biggest parties, which is SDP and HDZ, who were also going to their internal fights, and they were like in some kind of this fantasy movie. They didn't put us on their, we weren't on their screen, so we had a really free space to work. Our greatest win actually was to become a media darling. So we had a real eye of the media. But that to become media darling was the work of 10 years of Tomislav Tomašević and other activists and people who were involved in this political process. And to mention one more thing is that we have 5 left parties who agreed and managed to work together to make this really big result. So that was one of the most important things. And that is all what we learned from friends from Greece and friends from Spain. And actually, now it seems so easy because you only have to listen what other people say and actually do it. So you have to get together, find the topics, find the people, get some little money, lots of enthusiasm, and the change will happen.
Dobrica, would you say that Ne davimo Beograd is a media darling, and why not?
What it means?
I understand that in Croatia they have something that resembles independent media.
Sorry, media darling means that while we were working as a civil society activists and local parties, you didn't have a chance to get in the main media. You didn't have a chance to go to end up in newspapers. Whatever you do, you end up in some alternative media. And when you become a media, what does it mean to become a media darling? That means that whatever we do, we were in Dnevnik, in main headlines in newspapers, internet portals, and our party leaders were called for interviews, for debates. So that means to become media darling. So the media was quite open to us. And the reason why it was because really bad opposition parties and really bad leaders of government parties.
Yeah, we have all of that in Serbia, but still, whenever there is a party or a group taking a critical stance towards the state, they only end up in tabloids being called traitors and enemies of the state. But put that aside, I believe that the experience of creating and growing Ne davimo Beograd has many things in common with Možemo and with movements from Croatia. And one part of that shared experience is bringing different movements together and having them work together. And just as is the case in Croatia, Ne davimo Beograd did progress from starting off as a local movement and then moving on to the national level. And also knowing that bringing different organizations together is sometimes a big problem on the left, because as much as there is a common ground for cooperation, different organizations push for their own agendas. I want to ask Dobrica about his personal and organizational experience in this field and what were the challenges and how to overcome these challenges and grow stronger.
I will say that is work in progress. That is constant issues that we are facing all of our work. And I really think that there is no easy solution to that. I think that all of us personally and organizationally and also politically must seek this kind of cooperation, if not the unity, especially in this kind of left, green, progressive movements and ideologically arenas. But that is the hard part. Where is the hard part is in the making of that. So I'm very fond of this kind of tactical networks and making coalitions around particular issue when people can then at the first place get to know each other, to see how they are working together, and then from that going in something bigger and beyond beyond just tactical network becoming some kind of political force or coalition or go to elections or stuff like that. In our experience, we tried that on a couple of occasions and a couple of times, and we are still trying. There are there is always this kind of, we are calling it the war of the logos, like which logo is a bigger, and where to put the, who is the first and who is the second, etc. But I guess that is natural, and that is something like it's politics basically. But I guess that the solution to that is to be more offensive in the way of how you are inducing the topics and themes, not just to be reactive as we are generally as people on the left. So we are reacting to bad things which are happening in our cities and in our time in our towns and our countries, and by that we are then forgetting that we can bring some hope and new solutions, and by that bring more people to support us. So one of the, just getting a little bit shorter with that, with the conclusion, one is making concrete tactical alliances around some particular issue, which then allows you to meet with people, to see how they are thinking, and to basically become more friends and more support, to get more support and more honest, and to build some kind of relationship between people. And another one is to induce the topics which are beyond something that you are against. So in our work personally, so and all of the name of Ne davimo Beograd, it's do not let Belgrade drown, is something like negative connotation. We are very started as a movement and the struggle against one big mega urban project of the Belgrade waterfront, and that is something which is still we are carrying as a burden, in the sense that we are perceived as something, some people who are against. Nevertheless, the things which are we against are enough bad, and that is a good cause in that sense. But still, if we want to grow stronger and to approach more people, we must be more offensive and more hopeful and more going into some solutions that we are suggesting. And because of that, I think this Možemo example from Croatia is something which we are closely looking into.
Tibor?
Yeah, if I may add, the positive campaign was the really main factor, because politics as it is in Croatia is also always fighting partisans against Ustasha, and actually stupid subjects which are not actually benefiting the citizens and economic process and the growth of the country. So a lot of parties always make campaign against somebody. So our campaign and the Možemo political platform was something really positive, and even everything was really important, even the design and the logo of the party, which was sparkling green or something like that, was, and smiling faces of new politicians was a really important thing that attracted the voters outside of the classic left bubble. So for me, the sign that we are doing the right thing was when really old ladies came to us and they were saying, Tomislav Tomašević is our guy. He's our leader. He can help us to make Croatia better again. So when you have a feedback like that, then you know that you're out of your bubble. You're talking to people who are not thinking really in fine lines about politics. They're thinking about politics in general. They just want to see this pretty face and somebody who is saying everything is going to be okay. And when you're pragmatic in politics, which is really important if you really want to make a difference, because the difference is the voters, and the number of voters are the seats in parliament. Then you have to have those kind of voters.
And you said you used the word bubble twice. I'll use it the third time. It seems to me whenever I go to conference when people are discussing the left, I find it hard to understand like 40% of the words used, let alone the concepts they represent. And at least in Serbia, the left is often perceived as well-educated, young middle class that spends a lot of time with theory and little time in practice. And there I want to go back to Arlind and to ask him, how do we, if this is true in his experience, how do we overcome this and how we get across this gap? How do we communicate also with, or above everything else, with those that we at least perceive as very different from us?
Okay, it's basically unavoidable that you have intellectuals who are engaged on the left. And intellectuals most probably come from the middle class. But the basic question is, do they really intend to change things, or just want to look at the mirror and reclaim themselves? If they want to change things, if they want to trigger something, they need to go beyond themselves. And I'm not talking just about, university professors or teachers. I'm even talking about students, meaning young intellectuals, future intellectuals, or even people who are frustrated by not fulfilling their potential in this current predatory capitalism that we have. So the basic question is, do they intend real change? And if they do they understand that just talking about themselves, to themselves, or to people in the same minority class position as themselves, they are not going to bring any kind of change? Not only, and not just not real or radical change, but even the marginal change that they might hope for in terms of some civil rights or social rights and things like that. We have to ask the proper question, which is, which group in society, which class in society, which social force in society is on the strategic position to pull the plug off this kind of system? And the answer will never be just students, or just intellectuals, or just the middle class. So basically we need to go to workers, I think. Of course, the left in the 19th and in most of the 20th century defined the working class mostly like industrial working class, but not only in advanced capitalist societies, but moreover in peripheral capitalist formations like those in the Balkans, the industrial working class is not a majority class. Basically, we in the Balkans, and I'm quoting now one of the founders of historical materialism, does not suffer only from capitalism, but also from the lack of capitalism. So we don't even have this kind of advanced and fully developed capitalist economy and society. Therefore, we need to broaden the margins of the working class. We have, of course, to even redefine what works means, what productive work or even essential work means. It also should embrace not only industrial work, but also effective work, also cognitive work, also works in the services, also the reproductive work, which is most of the time unrecognized as work. But nonetheless, we have to stress or to stick to the basic question. Which is the component in our society which, by not giving their consent, by staying at home, but by not going to this structure of the reproduction of capital, can put the system into a crisis? That's why the first answer that comes to my mind is workers in this broad definition of work. It is also what I call plebeians, people who are doing marginal work, who are doing precarious work. So basically, by organizing, by helping in their organization, we could bring real change. But on the other hand, we should stop being on the defensive. The left in the last decades has been in a kind of defensive. We were fighting for what a French philosopher called ligne de fuite, meaning lanes of escape, or liberating space, or I don't know, resistance. These things are important, but they would be much more important if they are part of a strategy being called a war of position, meaning a strategy that doesn't avoid the crucial question of state power. What are we going to do with state power? Can we build movements which just bombard the state with demands, or we have to think about capturing state power in order to democratize it? So the question is how we can capture state power. Of course, we can think about insurrection, armed insurrection, like in the 20th century. I don't think this is a viable option nowadays. So basically, we have to build parties, new parties, enter parliamentary politics, not become part of electoral parties which just intend to gather votes and nothing else, but having one foot inside institutions and one foot in the movement. But we need to address the question of state power. The state is not going to vanish. The state is important. That's why those who have economic power use political power and state power. They need it. Also, we need it. So we have to build these new strategies, new political subjects, in order not just to challenge the state, but also to, I know it sounds a little bit Bolshevik, like capturing state power, but I mean, not capturing state power by a avant-garde, political avant-garde, but by movements, by their political representatives, which enter institutions and use state power in order to implement policies which we need a lot.
Thank you. We can also go to the questions now, but there is one thing I would like to ask Nita beforehand. In all of the conversations I've had during the preparation of this talk, there was one word that emerged as critically important, and that was solidarity. And then I was thinking also, when looking at the protests in Belgrade and how they got so incredibly brutal. And when I told Nita I've never seen anything so brutal before, she told me I have. I was thinking about how nonviolent resistance could be the answer to what's happening in Belgrade now. And then, of course, I was thinking about nonviolent resistance in Kosovo that I've read a bit about, and also how strong sense of solidarity governed this entire setting. And looking at that time, I don't think it's very comparable. The context is different in so many ways, but I would still like us to look back and then to look forward and to see what are the elements that we can perhaps look for in our future to build the solidarity of that kind and strength.
I think that's probably the key kind of question, and I think in this conversation there are certainly different moments came up of agreement and disagreement, and so I think going back to this question of violence, and that somehow I'm propagating violence. I don't know, I grew up in the 90s in Kosovo, so I have a very interesting relationship to violence, and I think in that I recognize it in all of its kind of insidious and symbolic and material forms, better than you all know. But, and so that actually got me thinking about, one of the responses, let's say, to Black Lives Matter, for example, protests throughout the U.S. has been, it's really bad that George Floyd was killed, but people shouldn't destroy property. And I think it should be the other way around. It's really bad that property is being destroyed, but he shouldn't have been killed. And I think it's about reversing the way in which we identify the issue and we define the issue. So what we have is state power. We have militarized violence in the hands of states, in the hands of private businesses and so forth, that is used against citizens. And so it's, I think obviously the trick is how do we all find common ground? And I can find ways in which some of the things that, for example, were said by some of the previous speakers is that, there are some gender issues, or that somehow Kosovo and Croatia share something. Yes, Kosovo and Croatia and Serbia and all of these spaces share something in that they do have a political elite in power that came out of wars, and now they own almost everything and they run everything. But Kosovo was in a very different position during state socialism in former Yugoslavia. So there needs to be a recognition of the structural inequalities that have produced also current positions. And that's also, when you have to recognize as to why this historical materialism also explanation doesn't work in many cases, because you have people from the global south, all kinds of movements that do not fit into the unilinearity of history as explained by this narrative, because they have not accounted for the transatlantic slave trade, they have not accounted for colonialism, they have not accounted for misogyny and the complete exploitation of reproductive labor. So there is a problem within all kinds of leftist positions, because there hasn't been a recognition by those who have produced most of that knowledge on the way in which it has actually been based on white middle class privilege. And that this is not an issue of some gender issues and sexual harassment, or, oh, you want to be paid because you're going to take care of your own children. Well, you don't take care of yours. So, so I think there needs to be a major rethinking on the theoretical and political terms that the so-called left, I don't think of it in any way as singular. It cannot be, I think. It has to be produced multiply from multiple positions, for intersecting positions of inequality and also of an attempt to be able to access those. So I think, yeah. That's it for now, but no.
Now is the question time. So hopefully someone will raise their hand and you have a question.
Hello? We have a question there. I will only ask you to keep your mask on, and I'll hold the mic for every one of you. So you don't know.
Hi everyone, thank you for your comments. Can you hear me? Yeah, okay. I actually just had one question, and I don't know if any one of you wants to take it up, because you all talked a bit from your own kind of almost national perspectives, and I was wondering if there were issues that were trans-regional. And Nita mentioned something very interesting, which is that the kind of the movements that are making us at least excited are movements about resources like water, energy, and these are things that I think are trans-regional as problems, not necessarily very state-specific. And I was wondering whether you guys as organizers see it as potential for solidarity or joint movements.
I think absolutely I would agree, that's where we can find those common interests, because there will be very different readings of diverse pasts. And because that these pasts and histories have been politicized and instrumentalized in so many different ways, that state capture in all of our countries has occurred simultaneously as history has also been captured and put to the service of a new political elite that has come to power, because the way in which they've come to power is by creating a complete representational system that speaks to their legitimacy to be in power, right? It works both on the both on terms of the the representation, the ideology, but then also grabbing hold of all the so-called, if you want to use more classical terms, means of production, right? Of being able to generate profit, and history has been a means of actually generating economic profit for them as well. And so I think not to necessarily say we need to not talk about it, not to address that. What we actually do need to address are these issues of these resources, of these natural resources, and how we want to use them, how we want to define them. And I think they do have to become a public good. And if they are defined as a public good, then we can move across some of the issues of borders and so forth. Because the issue of the border in Kosovo and the border swap is an issue of resources, of water resources. You don't need coal if you don't have water. So if Uyman is given away all the coal in the world, you can't do anything with it if you don't have the water for it. So it is ultimately going to be a political issue as well. So the trick would be, I think the difficulty would be to create solidarities across borders in this region that would then also kind of not attempt to nationalize those resources. That's, I think, difficult. It's going to be difficult too, though.
I'm just going to make a spin-off question out of this question. I know that both Dobrica and Sibor, their movements have in the past, on many occasions, not only expressed solidarity between each other and what happens in Croatia and Serbia, but also taken some more concrete steps in this regard. But I want to ask either one of you or both of you, what is your experience in terms of sometimes damage can be taken locally when you're perceived as someone talking to the person from the other side of the border. And I know of organizations fearing that this could fire back at them, and knowing that politics is a tool of pragmatism in some ways. How do you deal with this? Steven?
Well, I didn't hear the whole question, but I think I get the main point. Before I joined the politics, I was also working for some campaigns in Greenpeace, and they were having this agenda against coal power plants and things like that. But if you want to do politics, you have to have an agenda and topic which people can relate to. And if you say the water is good, and you don't have general people who can relate to that water is not it's not available to a lot of people, then you're missing the point, because in general the people who don't have access to water are those who are somewhere in rural places or things like that, who are not politically literate, to say it like that. So that's the work of civil society. And if you want to have a political power, then you have to do some more things like making a grassroots movements about topics which people can relate to. And that's the local issues. And from the local issues, when you have those people in local places, then you grow. Then you find the similar topics in other cities or other areas, and that's the way you build up some political organization. And then you have a power, then you go to parliament. I think that Dobrica has the similar experience.
That is something that we are calling like inducing the politics. So we must induce the like people, how people are thinking about politics and how they are involved in politics. And regarding these local and issues which are down to earth and everyday stuff, I really think that that is also not just the tactical issue, how you approach the citizen and how you grow your base, but that is also something how you are building your personal experience and your credibility, and how you test yourself for what you are, and how you learn how the system is made up, and how the organization is functioning. And by that, I really think that is some kind of self looking into yourself also inside yourself to see are you up to that. And in my experience, and in previous activities, plenty of stuff came as a way of um, how you want to how you want to fix something which is important for you. At the beginning, it was, like cultural, making some kind of cultural centers, or advocating and fighting for more bike lanes, or protecting some park, or something which is maybe not in your neighborhood, but something which is important to you personally and to your friends, and stuff like that. And by doing that, then you gradually learn about these big systemic problems, and how this division between work, capital, and globalism is functioning. And I really think that is the only way which then on the later phases in this political fight, and the later phases of your life can be sustainable, in the sense that you are know then where you are standing, and you have some kind of yeah, credibility, and some kind of experience that you went from firsthand.
You want to say something?
Just to add that one good example that you have for an example, you have some fight of defending some park where somebody wants to build some building or some skyscraper, and the locals relate to that, and then you have their attention, and they're involved because they want to protect their park. But then, what is actually the problem? The problem is corruption, because those landowners or those investors corrupted government to build that skyscraper, and the corruption is something which is the real problem. And when you come to people with the idea that corruption is a problem, then it's something that's abstract. They don't really, everybody are doing something corruptive or doing something, so they're afraid of that problem. I'm talking about real general people. And if you connect the problem of building a skyscraper in their park with corruption, then they realize that it is a time to fight, and then you give them two tools, and then you have a grassroots movement which is fighting the skyscraper, which is actually fighting the corruption.
More questions?
We have a question from the audience, or a comment. It can also be a comment if you have a comment. It doesn't have to be a question.
It's a comment leading to a question, and it's for Arlind. And I hope I understood you correctly, because earlier you were talking about the intellectual and also criticizing the position and the role that intellectuals have today, because you described the intellectual being more middle class, somebody who sits comfortably and writes but not necessarily gets involved in the field. So you kind of, the way I understood the way you described the role of the intellectual, is there dangers of diminishing the role if we see the intellectuals as just basically providing theory or providing writing, and there's not much use of it? Because I actually do think that there is use of it, because if we look at especially movements today that are coming from the margins, if we look, for example, at the feminist movement, the so-called third feminist movement taking place today, I think they end up feeding a lot on that research, and that research that comes from the intellectual is very important, also in terms of how we understand in the inequalities that exist and how we understand the struggles of the past and how they feed into our current realities of today. Because sometimes I feel that specifically the elites that we are criticizing, they also try to confuse the intellectual, with the elite. So like, and I think it's very important to keep those two separate, that the political elite is separate and the intellectual is separate, and we do need intellectuals in society, because this idea that the intellectual is disconnected is, I think, something that autocrats also want the larger society to think, because it ends up delegitimizing those critical voices. And I don't think there's anything wrong with having, we need intellect to be produced. So just how do you see, if you understand my question in that regard? So why are you critical of the intellectual, and what role do they have, and who are actually the intellectuals of today? I also think that's something that we need to redefine, because who make, or the media also the smaller, the more independent voices. It's not just academia. I think it goes beyond the academia. So also, who are the intellectuals of today, and what role do they have to play?
To appreciate intellectuals in their intellectual work. If they are scientists, if they are social critics, they might even be non-conformist, or they might even have different opinions from mine. What I was criticizing was intellectuals acting as activists. And most of the time, at least in my experience in Albania, I see some of them trying to divert causes, trying to somehow hegemonize, patronize common people, trying to tell workers, for example, don't talk about your enemy. Your boss is not the enemy. The oligarch is not the enemy. Let's talk, for example, about something which might be important, but in my perspective is not that important to the fate of common people. That's why we can have this middle class liberal agenda imposed towards common people. If common people want, for example, or workers, let's not be that generic, want to build a new union, want to fight for their rights, want somehow intuitively are eager for a radical socio-economic agenda, someone comes and tells them this is not important. Parliamentary democracy is the most important thing in the world. EU integration is the most important thing in the world. How come so? They, especially, of course, I'm a middle-class intellectual, so I'm not talking about something which is totally alien from me. But I think in a social movement, the question of hegemony is very important. Which social force has the hegemony within the movement? And in my perspective, unfortunately, most of the time, let's put it this way, young, middle class, liberal intellectuals do have this kind of hegemony. If they are good philosophers, if they are good scientists, I will applaud them, because they contribute a lot to our understanding. And it is very, very important to do so. But I'm talking about this kind of middle class liberal intellectuals which go into emerging social movements and somehow disempower them. Tell people what to do. Patronize them. Do this kind of, be some kind of ideological policeman to common people. Tell them this is not right. This concept is, reactionary. It's very dangerous. So get out of here. Okay, you might be a worker. You might be a very poor worker. But you said a very dangerous thing. something reactionary came out of your mouth. So go to hell now. So basically, they don't intend to become what Gramsci called organic intellectuals. We need organic intellectuals. We need people who go to workers, to plebeians, to the marginalized, and understand even their biases, understand the structural determinators of their biases, and work with them, and show their unconditional solidarity to their plight, and don't ideologically police them. Okay.
Thank you. More questions or comments?
Oh, we have a question there. And then I'll have one myself. I'll hold the mic for myself later.
No, someone else needs to hold the mic for you.
I'm going to refer to what Nita said, that you said that there's this competition over resources, and then you mentioned that there's this sort of solution that if they became public goods. But then there's this inherent failure in that, because even if they're publicly provided by this system, which is inherently corrupt. And then you went to talk about how, and then you talked about, sorry, I'm having a bit of a brain fart. And then you continued to talk about how we needed to have this, there was this moment in Kosovo's politics where where the people needed to react, because all in the Balkans it's a fact that we have this hoax of a democracy, and when there needed to be action, there weren't. Does that mean that there's a lack of hope in Kosovo, there's a lack of hope in the Balkans, and how is this corrupt democracy perpetuated? How can we combat that?
Thank you for the question. At the risk of sounding, as a non-inorganic intellectual, but I think ultimately this is not necessarily a question, right? And I'm maybe trying to evade the question because it's a difficult one. But I do think that it is something that needs to be put to more people, right? I seriously would not want to presume that I have the answer to that, right? Because I do think, and if it is what Arlind is saying, that it is about going to having people from workers in a factory to homemakers, although you didn't mention homemakers, because I had the question about which would be that class that could generate that change, and I think it's women, and because that is the one group of workers, of laborers, that are not recognized as workers in their reproductive work. And so, you have examples from in 78, the major strike in Iceland when women went on strike and halted the entire economy, to, the way in which women's strikes in the past 3-4 years have actually contributed to reinventing strikes, right? So I think, there's all kinds of things that are happening right now that do give us a lot of hope, that there is a rethinking of, reimagining, a new imagining of politics, right? And I think that is what would lead us to answering your first question, right? As a public good, how would we define it? How would that be managed? There's some possibilities, or what Eileen was saying is that you have movements who are represented. There are other examples. You have different municipalities, for example, throughout in Spain and in other places, who are reorganizing the way in which the cities are being run. That's one way to start to think about it, that instead of thinking only of politics at that larger macro level, we start to think about my town, my village, my city, and connecting it to different cities that are connected anyway in different ways, through migration, through the way in which resources move, the way in which money moves, and goods and people. We're already very interconnected. We can't think of find a village in Kosovo that is not connected globally, right? Not that it wasn't, but we forget that part. We forget that we were part of a global economy even in the past. Swiss Army knives were made in Jakov. Lipian made Coca-Cola. We were not outside of the system, right? And then made to go into the system, and now we're, right? So I think we need to have a more complex understanding of that past, but also of how those resources have been privatized, and there needs to be a larger demand, I think, for making them public again. And even whatever has been privatized, I think, needs to go back to being a public good, you know? But I don't think I have an answer to exactly how that would look like, you know? So I don't know if I answered both.
Now, my turn. I often hear the references, and this is a question or comment that might resonate. That I'm especially curious to know the perspective of Arlind and Dobrica as well, as part of movements of political activism that have very much come from the core of citizens. And one thing that it's often discussed when we talk about the left, it's the divisions within the left itself and the difficulties and the compromises that the left, different groups of the left have to often make to actually come together or achieve that social justice agenda that you want to bring to government if you actually make it to the institution. And one of the things that I always think about, because there's a lot of references to Spain, where I'm from, actually, and the reference is often to Podemos, which is a party that made it to government. It's in government right now. It came from social housing, rights movements, from fighting for education against Bologna, European programs. It came from a very wide range of social justice type of protests. And one of the things that is, so for example, this party is now with a socialist in government, and that's one compromise that the left had to make to be at government with a power of executive politics. But one compromise that is rarely mentioned is the compromises it had to do with within its own. The compromises where they lost unity with other leftist groups, for example, anti-capitalist or other formations in the left, in the spectrum of the left to the left, if I can use that expression. So I'm wondering now, what were the compromises, or where do you see the position of the left, of these grassroots, citizen-led movements seeking social justice in places like Albania or in Belgrade, in Serbia? Where do you see the left is here? Like, what are the struggles you are encountering to unify as a left? And also, is it ready, this left, to make compromises towards the outside or towards the inside more, and really come together and overcome these internal struggles?
I heard there were some interruptions, but I guess it's a clear context and the question for me. How we see it is similar that we already mentioned. So, by my opinion, our common struggles are for clean air, for drinking water, for land which we can grow food which it doesn't kill us. So I guess all of those things are all of those things are connecting us more than the current political elites wants to divide us. And for me personally, one of the biggest the biggest hopeful events that we saw in the region was those struggles for the small hydropower plants when on Kosovo and other parts of the region. Also the struggle for the clean air, which is basically killing us. So nevertheless, where are the borders between our countries? And I really think that this kind of connections between activists and the left-wing groups and progressive forces in the region are very strong. So, for example, for us, we know people and similar groups in Croatia, Bosnia, Kosovo, Macedonia, and those connections are very strong and tight. And I really think that in the future, following the example of Možemo in Croatia, which in couple of next years there will be in some government or in the city of Zagreb for the next 2 3 years, and I guess those connections will be then even stronger. And I really think in the region there are next wave is this progressive political force that then can work on things that then on the things which connect us, not on the things which divide us. And I really think that is for me personally hope for the next generation that is coming. And regarding that is a little bit hopeful, and regarding this where the left is going, I cannot predict that, and I am not sure that anybody can. I only can predict that we must work even harder on the issues that are important to us. For example, in these couple of days in Serbia, we had this convoy of humanitarian aid for the south, for the cities and the hospitals in Sandžak, in Novi Pazar, Sjenica, Tutin, and then those areas which are not conceived as a thing which Belgrade pay attention because of the religious background and the people who are living there. And also then we are continually struggling for the values which are important to us. For example, tomorrow we are going to this town of Kruševac to support a woman which is suing the mayor of small town for sexual harassment and stuff like that. So I guess this wave of solidarity is also something which we must work constantly, and that will differentiate us from any other.
If I may add to that answer, that for example, what happened in Croatia and how Možemo became Možemo is of these left parties, which were they're all smaller parties. At one point in the time, they tried to make a difference by their own, and they failed. So all the parties have this experience of failing in some elections. So with that recognition, they realize that only together there is a chance for making a difference. So and then when you come together, there is we agreed to make less compromises and to minimize compromises and to be ready to make sacrifice. So for Možemo or for Zagrebianaš in Zagreb, we are now in position to think about participating in power on local level in Zagreb by the results of these elections, but we never intended to participate in power in parliament. We are ready to learn and to be the spicy opposition. So, but we are now 3 years opposition in Zagreb, and after 3 and now it will be 4 years of being opposition and being a screamer all over again from inside of political arena, after being almost a lifetime screamer from civil society, you are ready to make some compromises and to risk to sacrifice some things to be in a place to make a real difference and to really make a shift.
5 or 6 years ago in Albania, nobody, and I mean nobody, in the public realm spoke about workers' rights. Not only that, but nobody even spoke about workers. Even workers didn't speak about being workers. You might interview a worker, talk with him or her, and most probably they would better identify themselves as, fans of Barcelona than having this important social and class identity. What we have been doing in Albania in the recent years is trying to not only help workers in their organization, but even fight this hegemonic ideological, let's put it, war or struggle, in order to recognize workers as an important block of social bloc in society. Or their rights being not only second-handed social rights, but basic human rights. Saying this, I understand that we face common enemies, but we also have our differences. And we cannot put these differences under the carpet. We can try to solve them, we can try to have points in common, but these differences are going to remain. And I'm being honest enough in admitting that there is a struggle for hegemony within the movement. Which is the neuralgic place in terms of strategy? Is it the workplace? In my opinion, it is still the workplace. And talking about Albania, I'm thinking about textile workers. The most important component of the working class. And if we talk about textile workers, we're talking about the workforce, 90% of whom are women workers. So it is not sidelining the gender aspects, but it is understanding that you need a movement, but you need also to put the basic question, which is the neuralgic place, which is within the sectors of society, that sector which has a totalizing effect on other sectors. And in my opinion, capitalism is still in force. Capitalism has a totalizing influence in other realms, important also realms of society. And we need to fight capitalism. We need, of course, to fight neoliberal capitalism, which is the most predatory one. We need to democratize our society. We need to, as I told you before, enter into the institutions, trying to change them, put pressure on them. And of course, we need to answer radical and let's say, difficult questions like those of strategy. How can we win when it seems that everybody, meaning the powerful, are against us? What are the sacrifices? Even in personal terms, what are the sacrifices that we are ready to make? Are we ready to be put in prison? Are we ready to be shot at a demonstration? Unless we answer those questions positively, I don't think we are in a very good position to strike back. Those in power will do anything. Thanks.
Do we have time for, because speaking about prison, the quarantine time.
We have another two people who have raised their hand, so we can cover that. And if maybe anyone has another question, raise your hand now, so we know it from now, and we're reaching the end. So yeah.
Thanks. I'm not sure if this is going to be a comment or a question, so bear with me. But I like to see myself as being part in somehow of the leftist movements. I'm going to talk in we terms. And I like to consider, I like to take the liberty to think that I'm a rational person and a well-read person. But every time when I speak to my fellow leftists, I need a handbook of understanding what is being said. And I think this is like one of the most common problems that we face as a leftist, that we still have not found the discourse, the language, to reach broader than this circle of people. And I think if we continue to do that, it's going to remain. Like, we're going to talk to each other, and this is where it's going to stay, and we will never achieve those aspirations, hopes of change, and whatever the power terms we want to use to convey this idea. So maybe the question is, do you agree with me? And if so, how can we do this? How can we simplify our language? Because we need to go beyond talking to each other, basically, yeah. So.
Sibor, please.
You're absolutely right. So, for example, all the main leaders in Možemo, in a way, are all went to one live training of having a contact with regular people, or how do you say, the workers. So Katarina Peović-Vuković, who is a professor of philosophy in Rijeka, she was while the demonstrators of Uljanik shipyard were in the strike, she was with them on a strike, talking and trying to help with the legal issues and things like that, in a position when she realized that she has to change her dialect. So she has to change the way she talks, so they can understand her. The same thing happened to Tomašević, who is actually a person from the, don't understand this wrong, but he's a person from street. He has a street language. He can talk with the professors, and he can talk with the football fans and people in park, which he spend nights in park defending park. My also experience is that I don't conceive myself as an intellectual. I'm actually working. I'm a labor worker. I'm the guy who is working, who is changing his coat in city assembly with a drill machine, working on construction site. So that's the way you can change your discourse and to speak to general people by not being smart. And the one thing that a lot of leftists do wrongly is they think that they can educate the working force, they can educate working class, but it's not about patronizing them or educating them. It's about understanding and trying to learn from them by being one of them, and then they receive you as one of them, and then you can work with them to make some organization and to make a movement. I recognize that also a lot of you're avoiding saying a political party or a politician, which is really funny for me. And we're always talking about working movements and left movements, but the left movements are not the one who will make a difference. Actually, the political parties are the one who will make a real difference. So all the difference becomes when a movement becomes a party, and I have a feeling that this is the main topic actually, how to create a party from a movement, because the party is the one who can get political power if we are going by democratic institutions.
The mic is working.
It's on? Yes. We're on. We have another question?
Yeah. First of all, I don't think we should position workers and the leftists and using words. I mean, we can, but I don't agree with using words such as patronizing the workers. I don't think workers can be patronized by leftists. I think workers are ahead. So, I mean, I think we should first off just respect their agency and their autonomy. But I had a simple question that goes along the lines with what Iliriana asked. I agree with you, by the way. So I wanted to ask Dobrica, as I know about Organizata Politike and Možemo a bit, but I want to ask Dobrica, do you position yourself within the left? And I also would like to know, is it easy to emerge as a left, as in to mobilize the so-called common people, especially in the context of our countries? We know what legacy communism has left to many of our countries, maybe all of us, in a way, directly or indirectly. So First off, do you position yourself as left loudly and publicly, and how simple or how difficult is it to navigate with the common people if you do that?
Yes, yes, of course. We also we're trying not just to say that we are kind of left platform or whatever. We are also trying to show that in through our actions and through, for example, we after decades of neglecting this kind of Second World War legacy and partisan struggle and anti-fascist struggle from in Serbia. For example, we organized this kind of big concert on the main square in the Belgrade for the day of the liberation of the Belgrade in the Second World War, as a proof that we are standing behind those values, which are particularly leftist. But I guess that my opinion is that for people that is not so important. It is because this kind of ideological schizophrenia of political parties and is more for that. But I guess for ordinary people, it's not so. People is not so important how you are calling yourself. It's more important what you're doing and how you are sticking to your values. For example, we had this thing with the our support for LGBT community, and that was the first when we make our movement, and then when the Belgrade Pride was happening, we then announced our support by basically putting the picture of big yellow duck, what was our kind of symbol with the rainbow and flag. So and then people started like, yeah, I was supporting you before, but not for this, and you can imagine what is the narrative. But after some time, after like 1 or 2 years, constantly we were saying the same things. People are then saying to us, okay, but I do not support you on the issue of, for example, LGBT, or for example, for some other things, but you are right in this and this, and you are sticking to your topics, and you are sticking into your values, and you're always with us and stuff like that. So I guess it is also a process. It's not like you just say I'm left wing and I'm whatever you say, and that's it. People then make some relationship toward you. It's more than that. It's what are you saying, and it's more important what are you doing. So yeah, I guess the solution is that be yourself and stick to your values.
We have one more question. Maybe if you're okay with that, we can reach the end with this question, but we'll see.
I'm very curious about Dobrica's particular comment that we have to only affect change through political parties as opposed through movements, especially when today we are seeing movements, huge movements across the world, particularly I'm thinking Black Lives Matters movements, which are making substantial changes without going through the political system. Is it more a question, I mean, obviously for long-term change, you do need to have some eventually political power. But in the immediate change, in making immediate changes, movements seem to be working right now, and movements are making serious, fundamental changes in the way we are doing things. Maybe it's more the need for political parties to be able to understand what these movements are about and what they're talking to, and use their language as opposed to using the language of academia or theory.
I believe it was Svibor who said that.
Yes, from to the one point, it depends about environment and in the level of democracy in which I have a feeling that for now the Kosovo, the movement is the way to make a difference, because it is you can't see yourself in I don't believe that you can be in a political position to make a political difference as a party in next maybe 3, 4, 5 years. I'm not so familiar about the political system in Kosovo, but as how political movement became a party in a developed democracy with movement, you can come to the one point and then you hit the wall, and you go across that wall if you become a party. So that was my point. That at one point, if you want to make a difference, you have to go to the political arena. And you mentioned the Black Lives Matter. We'll see how much that influence and about Black Lives Matter, because that's the moment at this point in time. But in long term, you will have politicians who will put some policies which will make a difference. So in America, probably some politicians are ready to listen, but I don't have a feeling that my experience here in Croatia is politicians are not listening. So you have to become a politician.
I'm not sure that there are two. That is either one or party or a movement. I guess that is the two-track way or three-track. It very depends. It's also depend what are your goals, what is the strategy to achieve it, and what is the idea that you want to promote or getting done. So I guess for me personally, I'm not fetishizing the political party as the only way of changing the hearts and minds and political system and the city or whatever you want to change. But that is one way. It very depends upon context. About the context, is about the people, is about the current situation. It's plenty of variable regarding that. It depends. It depends what you
If
want
I
to
may
achieve.
add, I agree with Dobrica, but I just want to say why did I say that? Because at one point here in Croatia, we didn't see a party which can make policies like that. So if you don't have a party on which you can influence with the movement, then there is no other way than to make your own party and to go to political arena. So that was my agenda. Of course, that movements are necessary to exist, no matter what kind of parties there are in parliament.
Nita, you had a...
Quickly, well, one thing I realized is that we never congratulated Svibor on the victory. So, but I just wanted to maybe just to give an explanation that actually in the case of Kosovo you do have exactly that. Vetëvendosje was a movement before it became a party, right? So it did start as a movement and then went through the route of turning into a political party and then winning the position of the largest party in the last election, but was overturned, as I said earlier, by a coup that was orchestrated both by the parties that were left behind and also our international friends. And in the next elections, they will definitely get an overwhelming majority. So then there will be the test of what they will do once they do have all that power to make decisions without necessarily having to build coalitions with others. But, and maybe we don't have the time for that right now, but I'm wondering, and in regard to Vetëvendosje, for example, with many people both within and also sympathetic to inside and outside, there is always the question of what are you going to be willing to negotiate on? So what will you give up once you enter kind of the seat of power? What are the things that you will say, okay, you can have this? So I'm wondering, for example, with a new government in Croatia, what are the things that you will maybe have to negotiate on? Is abortion going to be the first thing that you say, well, okay, you can have this? Or what are the things that, you will say, this is what we're going to put our foot down and we will not give up on? And what are the things that you will have to somehow negotiate with the larger parties and give up? or environment, will that be it? I don't know. Yeah.
Thankfully, we are not in power now, so we don't have to negotiate about that ideological questions. But our aim is to participate in a local level government, and actually including only with left or the seemingly left party, SDP. So we don't have to answer the questions like that to the people, because by values we are on the, pretty much on the same side. The only difference is that they are just talking about values and we want to pursue those values. And regarding the question is, I can't answer that question because I'm only one of the many. So that's the question. We are not asked at this moment, and we are preparing to answer that question. Maybe we will not engage negotiate about those things. Who knows? Maybe we will take second elections if we make some other accomplishment, and be ready to not make compromises. So those are the challenges which are in front of us. So I can't have that answer now.
Okay, so I think we've reached the temporary end of this discussion, at least for today. I want to thank our speakers, also to our Zoom speakers for spending this time with us and sharing their views, and thank you all for staying with us, and see you tomorrow.
On behalf of Kosovo 2.0, you are all invited to have a drink up there at the garden and some food, and continue this very, very interesting discussion we had tonight. Tomorrow we have a larger program, so please keep staying tuned in our social media. We have a full program until Saturday. Follow it up on our channels, and thank you again for joining us. Good night.